Concrete pressed cold and wet against Theron Vasile's cheek, and somewhere above him, the parking structure's fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent song, while his blood spread across the third level in a slow, dark bloom. He had taken 2 bullets, one through his side, one clipping his shoulder, and his men were already dead. The Delacroix crew had been thorough enough to cut the cameras, thorough enough to leave him for dead in a place where no one would hear anything until morning. But they had not been thorough enough to account for one thing. Marisol Finch was working a double shift. She was supposed to be on level 4. The assistant manager had switched her assignment at 11 that night, shuffling the housekeeping crew around because 2 people had called out sick, and Marisol had taken the extra hours without complaint, the way she always did. She needed the money. She was 26 years old, carried 260 pounds on a frame that her co-workers at the Market Grand had spent 3 years treating like a piece of lobby furniture, and she had a mother with a bad knee and a medical bill collection that never seemed to get shorter. Extra hours were extra hours. She heard the shots before she saw anything, 3 sharp cracks, then 2 more, then the squealing of tires. She pushed her housekeeping cart behind a concrete pillar and went absolutely still, her heart slamming against the inside of her chest, every instinct she possessed screaming at her to stay down and do not move. She stayed there for a full 2 minutes, breathing through her nose, listening to the silence, settle back over the structure like sediment after a disturbance. Then she heard the sound no amount of silence could cover up, the labored, wet breathing of a man who was still alive. Marisol Finch was not a hero. She would have told you that herself without any trace of false modesty. She was a housekeeper who was $2,300 behind on her rent and had a pack of crackers and half a can of soup waiting for her at home. But her older brother Darnell had spent 8 years with the Milwaukee Fire Department, and he had made his little sister sit through enough first aid training that she could recognize arterial bleeding from 15 feet away. The man on the concrete was losing blood faster than his body could compensate. She moved. She got to him in 12 seconds, dropping to her knees on the oil-stained floor, her uniform pants soaking through immediately. He was massive, broad-shouldered, well over 200 pounds of solid muscle beneath an expensive suit now destroyed by exit wounds, and he was conscious enough to grab her wrist the moment she touched him, his grip automatic and vicious. "Don't," she said, the same tone she used on her mother when the older woman tried to push herself up too fast after a bad fall. "I need to look at the wounds. Don't fight me." He did not fight her, maybe because he had no choice. The shoulder wound was bleeding heavily, but not the primary problem. It was the side wound she needed to address, just below the ribs, the blood coming too fast and too dark. She reached into her cart and pulled out a stack of white cleaning cloths, hotel issue, heavy cotton polyester blend, the thick utilitarian kind that held up to industrial washing, and she pressed 2 of them hard against the site, using her body weight to apply compression while she used her own hands to bind the cloths in place. She worked the knot the way Darnell had shown her on a Saturday afternoon 7 years ago, using a garden hose as a demonstration tool. A square knot, double-looped, pulled tight enough to maintain pressure without cutting circulation to the hip joint. Her hands were shaking, but they did not stop. He said something that sounded like a name. "Don't talk," she said. "You're wasting air you need." He went quiet. She got her cart positioned beside him, folded down the lower shelf, and did what she had spent years learning to do without intending to learn it, moving a body that could not help itself. She had repositioned her mother through 2 surgeries and a long recovery. She had moved furniture in suites the size of small apartments. She understood leverage, and she understood her own center of gravity in a way that most people never had reason to figure out, and she used both to slide Theron Vasile onto the lower shelf of the cart and cover him with a stack of folded linens. She found the phone in his breast pocket. The first contact listed was simply Nolan. "Your boss is in the parking structure," she said when a man answered. "Third level, north side. He's alive. Get here now." She did not give her name. She hung up. She pushed the cart to the nearest utility closet, got Theron off the shelf, and propped against the wall where he could breathe more easily, and checked the binding one last time. Then she stood up and looked at herself in the smudged metal panel beside the supply shelves. She was covered in blood from her collar to her knees. Her hands were nearly black with it. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph. Not because she had any particular plan, but because something in her gut told her she was standing in the middle of something she did not fully understand. And the one thing her mother had taught her since childhood was this: when something feels like it might matter later, document it now. She heard the elevator doors open on the far end of the level 4 minutes after that. Running footsteps, men's voices. She slipped out the fire exit and walked home through the cold Milwaukee night, and she did not look back. 3 days later, Marisol was back on her regular rotation, and her regular rotation included the penthouse suite on the 42nd floor of the Marquette Grand, which belonged, according to the hotel's internal records, to a long-term corporate tenant named Vasile Holdings. She had cleaned that suite for 3 years. She had changed the sheets, restocked the bar, removed the ashtrays, and learned early to never ask questions about the men in expensive suits who occupied the sitting room at all hours of the day and night. She walked in that Thursday morning with her cart and nearly dropped her spray bottle when she saw the man sitting up in the king-size bed. She recognized him immediately. The tattoos covering both forearms were the same ones she had pressed her hands against to keep him from sliding off a cart shelf. The jaw was the same, the quality of stillness about him, the way a dangerous thing holds itself when it is watching, was exactly the same. Theron Vasile was 43 years old, with dark eyes that held the specific flatness of a man who had made certain kinds of decisions so many times they had stopped costing him anything. He was still pale, the injury visible in the careful way he held his torso, but he was awake, and he was watching her push her cart through the door with an expression that said very clearly he had already assessed her and found her unworthy of sustained attention. "Housekeeping," Marisol said, the same thing she always said. "Come back later," said the man standing at the foot of the bed, lean, sharp-faced, with the practiced watchfulness of someone whose entire job was managing threats before they materialized, Nolan. She knew his voice now. "I can start in the bathroom," Marisol said, because she always said that too, and because the bathroom was on the far side of the suite and would give her somewhere to put her heart rate while it came back down. She made it halfway across the room. "What's your name?" Theron's voice was low and roughened, but it carried without effort, the kind of voice that expected to be heard the first time. Marisol stopped Marisol. He looked at her the way men like him looked at women like her. The brief, dismissive inventory, the conclusion reached before any evidence was actually examined. "You're not going to break anything moving around in here." She turned and looked at him squarely. "Excuse me." He made a small, contemptuous gesture at the suite, at the narrow spaces between the furniture pieces. "Navigating all this, you look like it might be a challenge." Marisol had been hearing variations of that observation since she was 12 years old. She had stopped feeling the sharp edge of it somewhere around the time she turned 20. What she felt now was something much quieter and considerably more durable, a complete absence of the need for his approval. "I've been cleaning this suite for 3 years," she said. "Nothing's broken yet." She paused. "Get some rest, Mr. Vasile. You look like you need it considerably more than I do." She turned and went into the bathroom before he could respond, and she heard Nolan say something low that made the room go very still behind her. She cleaned the bathroom with focused efficiency, listening through the door. Muted phone calls, the sound of footsteps, the low back and forth of men conducting business in the presence of someone they considered part of the fixtures. The same calculation these men had always made about her. She was the help. She was furniture. She was not worth the effort of discretion. It was how she learned, 2 days later, exactly what Theron Vasile believed about the night he almost died. She was changing out the towels in the sitting room while Nolan briefed Theron at the dining table, both of them speaking in the matter-of-fact tone of men accustomed to discussing terrible things over morning coffee. Marisol moved quietly. She kept her face neutral. She was, as she had always been, invisible. "Viveca's account checks out with her timeline," Nolan said. "She says she was in the structure for the meeting when the ambush started. Says she ran, pulled you out, got you onto the service elevator." Theron was quiet for a moment. "She told you this?" "Told me herself last night. She's waiting downstairs, wants to come up." "She arranged the meeting," Theron said. His voice was very even. "She's the one who set up the introduction with Delacroix." "We know." "So she sold me out, realized they'd clean her up next to close the loose end, and pulled me out to buy her way back in." "That's what the wire transfers indicate," Nolan said. 200,000 to a private account in the Caymans, registered under her trust. Payment dated 6 days before the ambush. The perfume. Theron touched the bandage at his side without seeming to realize he was doing it. "When I was going in and out, I remember a perfume. Viveca's, that gardenia she wears." Marisol's hands, mid-fold on a hand towel, went completely and utterly still. Not gardenia. What she had been wearing that night was a vanilla body lotion, the drugstore kind, 3 for the price of 2 at the Walgreens on National Avenue. She put it on before every shift because the industrial cleaning products she used cracked her hands raw if she didn't. She had been leaning over Theron Vasile for the better part of 20 minutes on the floor of level 3. Whatever scent he had carried with him from that night was hers, not Viveca's. Viveca had not been there. Marisol set the hand towel down with great precision, wheeled her cart toward the door, said quietly that housekeeping was finished, and rode the elevator down without once looking at her reflection in the brushed steel doors. In the lobby bathroom, she stood at the sink, with the water running cold over her wrists, and thought very carefully about what it would mean to say nothing at all. Viveca Strand arrived in the penthouse that afternoon in a dove-grey dress that probably cost more than Marisol made in 4 months, her dark hair arranged in the kind of studied effortlessness that required 2 hours and a professional to achieve. She was slender and angular and striking, and the moment the elevator doors opened, she crossed the room toward Theron with both hands outstretched, her eyes filling with tears that always looked convincing from a distance. "Theron." She stopped when he did not reach for her. "I've been beside myself. They told me you were stable, but I needed to see." "Sit down, Viveca." She sat. She arranged herself perfectly in the armchair across from him, pressed her fingertips together, and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this conversation until it felt organic. Nolan read out the financial evidence without inflection, the $200,000, the Cayman account, the Delacroix payment. Viveca listened with wide eyes and an open mouth, the portrait of devastated disbelief. "I was coerced," she said when he finished. "They had material that would have destroyed everything. I had no choice, and then when it all went wrong..." Her voice broke with perfect timing. "I couldn't leave you there. Whatever they'd made me do, I could not leave you bleeding on that floor. I dragged you myself. My hands, my arms, I got you to the service elevator. I tied my wrap around your side to slow the bleeding. I was covered in your blood, Theron. I have never been so terrified in my entire life." Marisol was in the service hallway outside the penthouse with her cart, replacing the amenity kits in the exterior supply cabinet. The main door had been left open 3 inches, which was enough. She had told herself she was here to finish a task. She had told herself that twice, walking back up, and she had believed it precisely as much as it deserved. The ivory Marchesa wrap, that was what Viveca was calling it. What had actually been pressed against Theron Vasile's wound that night was a hotel cleaning cloth, white with a single blue stripe along the hem, cotton polyester, washed so many times the fabric had gone soft, tied in a square knot by a housekeeper who had learned the technique from her brother on a Saturday afternoon when she was 19. It was not ivory, it was not designer. It had done its job without elegance or ceremony, and the woman now claiming credit for it had not been anywhere near that parking structure floor. "Show me your arms," Nolan said from inside the room. A pause. "What?" "You moved 240 pounds across concrete and onto a service elevator. Show me your arms." Another pause, longer. Adrenaline can give a person. "Your arms, Viveca." Marisol pushed the supply cabinet shut, quietly. She stood in the service hallway for 3 full seconds. Then she put her hand against the penthouse door and walked in. Every person in the room looked at her. 3 of Nolan's men positioned at the walls. Nolan himself standing near the window. Viveca, who had gone very still in her chair with her hands folded in her lap, and Theron Vasile, who watched her come through the door with an expression that had shifted into something careful and entirely unreadable. "I apologize for interrupting," Marisol said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. She walked forward until she was standing in the space between the 2 chairs, and she reached into the front pocket of her uniform and pulled out her phone. The laser sights from 2 rifles appeared on her chest. She did not look at them. "The wrap you're describing," she said to Viveca, "the ivory one, that's not what was used." She held the phone screen out toward Theron. "This was taken at 2:58 in the morning in the utility closet on level 3. The timestamp is embedded in the file." The photograph showed Marisol from the shoulders up. Her face was recognizable. Her grey uniform was soaked dark with blood from the collar to the bottom of the frame. Her hands, visible at the edges of the shot, were nearly black with it. Theron looked at the photograph for a long time without speaking. "The binding on your wound was a hotel cleaning cloth," Marisol said. "White cotton polyester with a blue stripe at the hem. I used a double square knot placed left of center to avoid compressing the iliac artery. My brother is a firefighter. He taught me that when I was 19. She kept her eyes steady on Theron's face. "The scent you remember from that night is not gardenia. It is a vanilla body lotion I buy at Walgreens, because the cleaning products I work with split the skin on my hands if I don't moisturize before a shift." She drew a slow breath. "I was assigned to level 3 that night because 2 members of the housekeeping crew called out sick and management reshuffled our assignments at 11. I was cleaning the north support columns when I heard the shots." The suite was completely silent. Viveca broke it. "This is..." She stood up, her composure fracturing at the edges. "You know what she's doing. She's a housekeeper. She cleans your rooms, Theron. She's trying to use this situation to make herself important." "Sit down." Viveca sat down. Theron was still looking at the photograph. He turned the phone slightly, as if the angle might reveal something new. Then he looked up at Marisol, and his expression held something she had not seen on him before, the specific discomfort of a man in the middle of a significant recalibration. "The cart," he said. "The lower shelf folds flat. I moved you on it to the utility closet. And then you called Nolan. I found your phone in your jacket. His name was at the top of the contacts." Nolan stepped back toward the window with his own phone already at his ear, his voice dropping to something she couldn't hear. "You didn't leave a name," Theron said. "No." "Why not?" Marisol considered how to answer that with honesty and economy. "Because I'd just spent 20 minutes on a parking garage floor next to 2 bullet wounds and several dead men. I understood enough about what that meant to know that attaching my name to it wasn't a safe decision. And yet you walked in here and attached your name to it." "Yes." "Why?" She looked at Viveca, who was watching her with eyes that had gone cold and calculating beneath the performed distress. Then she looked back at Theron, because nobody deserves to have someone else take credit for the only decent thing that happened to them that night. Theron Vasile had spent 20 years building something on the principle that loyalty was the only currency that held its value long-term, and in those 20 years he had been lied to by experts, people who had known him for decades, who had broken bread with him, who had looked him in the eye and told him exactly what he wanted to hear, while their other hand was already in his pocket. He had learned to recognize the particular sound of a lie told fluently. And he had been listening to Viveca's voice for 4 years and had never once let himself hear what was underneath it. He had also spent 20 years not seeing the people who changed his sheets. He looked at Marisol Finch, standing in the center of his penthouse with blood on her phone screen and nothing on her face except the specific, grounded dignity of a woman who had decided she was done being overlooked, and he understood, with the particular clarity that sometimes only arrives when you have been lying on a concrete floor measuring your own heartbeats, that he had been catastrophically careless in deciding what deserved his attention and what did not. "Nolan," he said. "Already on it." Nolan's voice came from the window, quiet and flat. "Take Viveca downstairs. Use the service exit." Viveca was on her feet before Nolan reached her. "Theron, please." "We're done," final as a door closing. She screamed his name twice as the men walked her to the service elevator. The heavy steel doors closed and swallowed the sound, and then the penthouse was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet after something irreversible has been decided inside them. Marisol stood where she was, holding her phone, not entirely certain what came next for her. Theron pushed himself up from the chair with some effort, one hand pressed carefully against his side. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see, in detail, the intersection of exhaustion and careful thinking in his face. "You could have stayed quiet," he said. "I know. Most people would have. I know that too." He looked at her, not the brief dismissive inventory from 3 days ago. This was something else entirely, the kind of looking that people like him did not waste on things they had already dismissed. She was 26 years old with work-roughened hands, and a uniform that had seen considerably better days and eyes that had held steady in this room in a way that most people with far more to protect than she had would not have managed. "You saved my life," Theron said, "and then you came back here and cleaned my bathroom." "It was on my rotation," Marisol said. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile. Too early for that, and she suspected those particular muscles had fallen out of regular use, but something genuine and small and entirely unguarded. "That's going to change," he said. "What you make, where you work, all of it." "Mr. Vasile." "Theron. A correction, not an invitation. Not yet. I owe you a debt. In the world I operate in, that is not something that gets carried without being addressed." He paused. "And I owe you an apology for what I said about the furniture. You said I might break something navigating the room." "Yes." Marisol thought about all the years she had made herself small in places like this, moving quietly, working efficiently, staying invisible, and how invisibility had seemed like the safest possible arrangement, right, up until the moment she had been the only person in a parking structure who could hear a man still breathing and had chosen, against every instinct of self-preservation, not to walk away from him. "Keep the apology," she said. "I need to finish my rotation. 4 more rooms after this one." He stepped aside. She went back to her cart. Marisol. She stopped at the door. "Nobody in this building is going to look past you again." The armored edge was gone from his voice entirely. "I'll make sure of it personally." She did not turn around. She kept one hand on the cart handle and breathed through the weight of a sentence like that. Landing somewhere inside her, it was clearly not going to move from easily. Then she walked out into the corridor and got back to work. And she did not let herself think too hard about the fact that after 3 years of pushing that cart down that hallway, she felt, for the first time, something she was only willing to call very quietly, and only to herself, seen.